Everybody, welcome to Sexual Health Education as Harm Reduction for Adults with Developmental Disabilities. Bit of a mouthful, but that was the title that I handed on. So obviously a shared learning forum presentation, and we'll have an open forum discussion at the end. I'm Spencer, your host, and we'll get started here. What do we want? Why is my next slide not coming up? There we go. It's a click, not a tap. Okay. So for the introduction, we'll talk about what is harm reduction, why we use it for sexual health education, what are the stakes, what's the harm if we don't do anything, what perpetuates the problem, limitations in Canadian reporting research statistics, biases and stigmas, talk about what is the solution, sexual health education as harm reduction, self-determination, empowerment, breaking the silence, upholding international human rights, and then we'll have an open discussion. I will have a break somewhere in the middle here. I've planned it so we have a little bit of a time for a bathroom or a coffee or whatever, but we'll get to that later. A little bit of a theme and disclaimer for you all today. We're going to be discussing themes of sexual violence, abuse, consent, harm reduction, sexual literacy. Other sensitive topics might come up surrounding these themes in the discussion or group questions or in the presentation today. And I definitely understand that some of these topics might be difficult for folks to discuss and for folks to hear for any number of reasons. So please feel free to turn off your camera, mute your microphone, and take a break anytime you feel necessary. You know your limits. We won't be upset if you turn your camera off, so just take care of yourselves today. The presentation can be made available afterwards via the recording on Connectability, or if you want to reach out to me, smarley@luminous.ca if you have any questions or concerns, or you'd like to discuss these topics one-on-one instead. I'm very much open to doing that. A little bit about me. Who is this person? What work do I do? And why did I want to host this presentation? So I'm Spencer Marley, obviously. I am a BSW, Bachelor of Social Work graduate. I'm a transitional support worker with the lovely team, GCSN team at Luminous Community Services. Working in adult services has provided me with a really unique perspective as we're seeing the direct results of just how the system is failing these community members with developmental and intellectual disabilities with regards to sexual health education. Obviously, I come from a social work background, and I find harm reduction models to be a really successful path in human services because it allows people to make informed decisions, it respects their autonomy, and understands that regardless of our opinions as service providers, individuals are going to make their own decisions. So we'll start off with a little bit of a check-in. I want to get an idea of where folks are at the start before we get into all the good stuff. So at this moment, when you hear the words sexual health education for adults with developmental disabilities, how does it make you feel? Use as many or as few words as you like, and most importantly, be honest with me. I'd really like to get an idea. So you can type your responses in the chat. You can shout it out if you'd like, but I can keep an eye on the chat here too, I think. So just give us an idea. More education is needed, more awareness. Hopeful, non-existent. Phyllis, yep. Should be made accessible to everyone. Crucial. I like that, Boshana. Important. Vital. Hardly discussed in a positive manner, yeah. Sorry, typing.
That's me. I was going to type it and I thought I'm just going to say it.
Okay, go
Sexual
for
health
it.
education is abuse prevention.
It is. Accessibility. All very good answers. Very hopeful as well. I like that. give folks a little bit more time to answer if they'd like to. Being seen as a regular sexual human being. Yeah, Claire, good one. Okay. So yeah, thank you all for your responses. If you come up with more, that's great. You can drop them in the chat as we go. Deanna is going to be my lovely chat monitor for today. But I really just wanted to get an idea of where folks were at. And I think it would help us place ourselves before we do the presentation, and then afterwards, maybe things have changed for you. So yeah, sexual health is part of health. From Sheila. Thank you, Sheila. All right. So first things first, we want to talk about harm reduction. Title of the presentation. Harm reduction is a stream of thought and form of practice that typically applies to drug use. Supervised consumption sites, clean needle exchange programs, fentanyl strips, and the buddy system are all harm reduction strategies that you may have heard of to keep people who are using drugs safe. The idea is that people, for many different reasons, are going to use drugs, so we want to meet them where they're at and provide safety nets so that overdose, spread of illness or disease, and death do not occur. On the right here, I have a little diagram that kind of highlights the core tenets of harm reduction. So we've got collaboration, respect, acceptance, empowerment, and compassion. And I think that when we think about the client rights policies that a lot of our organizations have in place, these are some of the things that the core tenets that we're seeing in those as well. The overlap is there, and whether we talk about harm reduction or not is another story. So it's just something to think about for you. As well as on the bottom right, or so the bottom left of our screen here, we have a link to supervised consumption services in Toronto. So when you get the presentation, it'll come up as a link for you. It's also at the end for resources. So harm reduction strategies are evidence-based practices that do not aim to encourage harmful behaviors, but rather work in collaboration with individuals and community organizations and services to uplift and support their individualized needs. Non-judgmental and compassionate approaches are key to successful harm reduction practices. And then on the right, again, we have our little diagram. So this is just an example of some of the everyday uses of harm reduction that you might not think about when you hear the words harm reduction. So sunscreen, seatbelts, bike helmets, speed limits, condom use, and cigarette filters. These are all part of activities we might participate in that are at some level risky. Going out in the sun does have health risks. Getting in a car has health risks. Driving down the street of Toronto might have a health risk. So you want to have different aspects in place that protect us. Even though we're going to do that harm, we want to do it in the safest way possible. Or even though we're going to put ourselves at risk, we want to do it in the safest way possible, or put things in place to protect us. I have a link on the bottom here for Harm Reduction International's website. I found it very helpful in explaining what harm reduction was in a simple and easy to understand way. Right. So why do we want to talk about sexual health education as a harm reduction technique? Why did I want to talk about sexual health education as a harm reduction technique? At GCSN, we support a variety of adult community clients who are at risk of homelessness and or are in crisis situations, oftentimes both. We address these concerns typically through a vacancy matching process with Disability Services Ontario, our DSO, time-limited staffing supports, and connections to our broad range of community partners. In our work, and in my work specifically that I've seen, an increase in clients who come to us with what we've titled sexualized behaviors that can come from a wide range of reasonings and often struggle to find housing in the disability services sector, connect with other service providers, and connect with their community in meaningful ways. In addition, we are seeing an increase in clients who are interested in connecting with others romantically or sexually, already have romantic or sexual partners, and are members of the LGBTQ+ community or are questioning their sexuality/gender identity. Oftentimes, we see these clients with sexualized behaviors overlooked for housing opportunities, community services, day programs, and more. They fall by the wayside because of a lack of understanding of where the behaviors come from. When we see the term sexualized behaviors used, we need to think about what exactly is being said. Do we mean that the client has a history of sexual assault? Is the client expressing interest in a romantic or sexual partner? Are they unaware of personal boundaries, as this is the case for a lot of our folks? Is it sensory seeking? It's important to distinguish what are normal human desires, powered by biological function, and what are actual safety risks. This is where I, and many others, as obvious in this presentation today, have noticed a gap in the disability services sector. It's really the hope that this presentation helps address some of these struggles and continues the conversation around solutions. What is the actual harm that we aim to reduce when we talk about harm reduction? Well, when we decide that sexual health education for adults with developmental disabilities is unnecessary, it can place these community members directly in harm's way. The harm includes, but is not limited to, high rates of sexual abuse, unsafe sex, both unprotected and in physically unsafe locations or spaces, unplanned pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections and injury, criminal charges leading to loss of housing, employment, loss of family supports, among many other things, as well as loneliness and social isolation. And again, not an exhaustive list. So discussing the specific numbers of individuals who experience sexual assault in Canada specifically is really helpful to get an idea of just how common it is for the people that we support to experience. Canadian research and studies are important to give us a snapshot of the state of sexual health education for adults with developmental disabilities on a local scale. York University's Department of Psychology found that in their study, individuals with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, were between 2 and 3 times more likely to experience sexualized victimization. If we operate on the assumption that these individuals may have been local to York University, it is very likely that they may have been individuals who were supported by the DSO Toronto region. This gives us an idea that these aren't just numbers, but potentially people that we all know and that we all support. While conducting research for this presentation, I found that statistics that specifically address sexual assault of individuals with developmental disabilities were predominantly coming from the United States and lacking in Canada on a broader scale. Many of Statistics Canada's figures only address physical disability and mental health-related conditions, but not developmental disabilities. Considering the vulnerability of this client population, a lack of Canada-wide research is, quite frankly, alarming. We can all agree. So Stats Canada's report for level 1 sexual assaults, this is across the board, not just for adults with developmental disabilities, because as I said, there's quite a lacking of that. So this is a comparison of statistics from 2018 to 2023, where we can see that the number of reports jumped in 2018 from 27,909 to 35,778 in 2023. On the bottom here, we have the total number of adults charged. So for 2018, that was 7,439. And in 2023, it was 9,800. And for the adults that were charged, we can assume that even fewer convictions than charges occurred, because the number decreases as you go farther through the court system. So we get to a little discussion, get your feedback on this. Why do you think a person might not report experiencing a sexual assault? You can feel free to unmute or type your responses in the chat. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings on this. Fear of reprimand. They might not know their rights. Lots of fear. Being accused of lying, not being believed, shame. Belief that there would be a lack of response from authorities, not being believed. Stigma, not being believed, a lot of not being believed. Yep. Victim blaming, not understanding it was assault. Shame, not understanding boundaries. Yeah, these are all really great responses. Thank you. Self-blame. Claire says they may mention it to a safe adult who dismisses them. Trauma of having to explain your story over and over again. Yeah.
So I would verbally say that individuals don't even know that they're being sexually assaulted. They have no context to your point of education, and they've been compliant their entire life, so they will continue to be compliant.
Understanding what is consent, fear of police.
Especially when you consider the lack of control they have in their lives to begin with. I think it would be easy to not even understand that that person's not supposed to do that to you. You just assume like, oh, everyone does stuff to me, whatever.
Right.
The person might try to communicate it in a way that we don't always understand or we don't listen to, because they might be nonverbal or like just use alternate forms of communication or different languages.
Person who causes the trauma may be someone close to them and they may fear reporting them. May not understand or know what a healthy relationship looks like. And part of the reason that I ask this is because when we talk about statistics, we want to address the individuals that aren't counted in these numbers. So that's why I was asking about why a person might not report. And you guys are a smart crowd because you've gotten one step ahead of me in the assumption that we're talking about our client population. So I wanted to move forward and say, drawing on what we discussed prior, why do you think a person with a developmental disability might not report a sexual assault? But you're all ahead of me and you're coming up with all of the great reasons. Maybe nonverbal. Yep. May not understand or know what a healthy relationship looks like. Yeah, great responses, guys. May have a history of attention-seeking statements. Okay. Give folks a minute or two to get their ideas in if they'd like. Again, you can unmute if you'd like to speak on it, and if you'd like, you can just put it in the chat. Displays challenging behaviors. Yeah. And that would lead to them not being believed or implying that they're lying because of their historical presentation. Yeah. We've got a really thoughtful bunch. I'm very lucky. One more minute. We'll move on.
Spencer, I'm trying not to ramble on myself.
You can ramble, go ahead.
Data and stats are notoriously an issue with our IDD community, especially around this particular topic. And I think what is problematic is our individuals aren't sexualized. And so the language isn't there in sort of the policies and conversation in the police system in our sector as well. So how do you disclose when people
It's not
don't
even
even
talked
get?
about.
That's right. And so that is not a box that's ticked in stats or data. It isn't going to make money. It isn't going to do anything for these folks because it's removed from the school systems. They don't get sex education. So it's a massive, massive problem that needs to be started and resolved in the educational system and then throughout.
Right. And what I was trying to display here is that we know that even for neurotypical communities, it's difficult to report. So the challenges that someone with a developmental disability might have in terms of language and understanding and how people view them is just an added hurdle, right? That's what I'm trying to display, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then we
Reporting might
have
not be accessible. Yeah, Meredith, yeah.
I think the barriers beyond just providing the sexual health education is massive,
Mhm.
right? So
Agreed.
it's an overhaul that's I don't think we'll ever live in our lifetime see,
Yeah,
but
yeah. We can certainly try.
that's right, absolutely.
That's why we're talking about it today, and I'm so glad
Yeah.
to see the turnout.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, if you have anything that comes up, you're thinking about it during the presentation, you can feel free to add it in the chat. Deanna said that she'd keep an eye on it for me, so she'll let me know. Okay. So this was the list that I came up with. Again, not at all exhaustive, and everybody went way beyond what I had originally written. So feeling that the incident was not important or serious enough to report, mistrust of authority figures who might become involved, police, medical, etc. And we know that even neurotypical communities have traumatic experiences involving the police and medical systems. Having to report the incident to a staff or support person, the person that you would report to is the abuser, and these are all answers that you folks came up with, so you're well ahead of me. Fear of retaliation, not being taken seriously, uncertainty or unaware of whether what occurred was a sexual assault or not, unable to verbalize that the assault occurred, and shame or guilt. And overall, we can really see that shame, secrecy, guilty feelings, and shame around sex and sexuality really do allow this cycle of sexual violence to continue. How does identity affect these statistics? So individuals with an intellectual disability are statistically more likely to experience victimization, according to a research study conducted by Fisher et al., and I'm sure this isn't surprising to anybody here. The rate of sexual assault victimization was more than 5 times higher among women, so 50 per thousand, than men, compared to 9 per thousand from Statistics Canada in 2021. Rates of sexual assault were higher among 15 to 24-year-olds. So that was 103 per thousand, and 25 to 34-year-olds, 50 per thousand, compared to any other age group. Bisexual people are sexually assaulted at a higher rate than heterosexual individuals. People who are bisexual experienced a rate of 541 sexual assault incidents per 1,000 population, and this is nearly 29 times higher than the rate among heterosexual Canadians, which is 19 per 1,000. These are just a few examples of the way that different marginalized identities can affect the rates of victimization and are not at all exhaustive. I'll repeat it till I'm blue in the face, but these are just a snapshot of the statistics. So we can take a break. We've kind of powered through these slides if you folks would like to, or we can continue. It's up to you. If you need 5 minutes to go to the bathroom, get a drink, stand up and stretch. Maybe we can have people write in the chat, say what they'd like to do. I'm fine either way, so don't be swayed by me.
Okay, we got some fine to continue. We can
Continue.
Me too. We can continue. Yep.
Okay,
People are into it.
awesome.
Amazing.
We can continue.
Okay.
Okie dokie. So let's talk about our biases as service providers, as individuals. Leaving our prejudices at the door is the first step in addressing the gaps that come from a lack of sexual health education. Discussions of sexual health education can bring up internalized feelings of shame, discomfort, and embarrassment, even for the most seasoned service providers. When we bring up the idea of educating adults with developmental disabilities in the areas of sex and sexuality, it may feel a little bit embarrassing, but that's why we continue the conversation, so that service providers become more and more comfortable overcoming their biases and serving our clients in the most responsive way possible. Stigma. Contrary to popular belief, adults with developmental disabilities can and do engage in sexual acts alone or with a partner. Just like in neurotypical communities, they can have fulfilling romantic and sexual relationships. They can practice safe sex, use birth control, masturbate, and express their sexualities in healthy and meaningful ways. And I think as people, we are all entitled to this, in my opinion. Social stigmas will tell us that adults with developmental disabilities are not capable of understanding sexual health education. When we make these harmful assumptions, we are taking away the power from individuals to decide for themselves. Sexual health is vital to a person's physical well-being. The World Health Organization defines sexual health as a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. It is not merely the absence of disease, dysfunction, or infirmity. So I'm going to put my social work studies hat on for a second here and talk about systems theory. So they're the different levels that an individual can experience oppression throughout society. So on a micro level, we've got the self. So in my little graph here on the side, we've got family, peers, and individuals. And this can internalize negative stereotypes, can come up as personalized shame, low self-worth or self-esteem, thoughts and feelings around I can never have a relationship. And this could also be related to previous abuse or maltreatment in terms of social or sexual senses as well. So for meso, we've got schools, communities, health agencies as well. And this is more of a systemic sense. So agencies not having any policies around sexual health, so it's never brought up before it becomes an issue. Staff are uncomfortable talking about or addressing these issues around sex, sexuality, gender expression. Agencies also fear lawsuits and liability risks. They're prioritizing legal liabilities over ethical practices and are what we owe to our clients, to the people that we serve in the community. On a macro scale, we've got the public. So lack of sexual health clinics that support folks with DDs. There are sexual health clinics, but do they have the staffing supports and the language to share this information with our client population in the way that they need it, in an accessible format? Obviously, I talked about a lack of research, statistics, and literature in Canada specifically, and overall public ignorance that leads to harmful myths. And again, we're just using the systems theory to illustrate the ways that stigma can directly affect our client populations at the different levels. So it's not just on a one-on-one basis. It's very systemic. We're going to look inward as service providers. So not that everybody in this presentation today is a neurotypical person, but neurotypical people are at a disadvantage with their sexual health education. So many adults, such as the service providers in this presentation today, have vastly different sexual health educations. This, of course, extends to families and other community connections. For individuals who did receive sexual health education, because some of us haven't, through school, parents, family, friends, etc., it may have looked very different. Even if it were thorough and continuous, it may have been steeped in a rhetoric that can allow for shame, discrimination, and prejudice. We want to keep in mind that sexual health education is often a mirror into the institution's moral assumptions about the purposes of sex. For me, looking inward for me, as someone who attended a Catholic high school, I was taught that sex was for procreation, and other than that, it was really glossed over. So we discussed the steps that men and women would take to procreate, and then basically they sent us back into the gymnasium to run laps. So now might be a great time to stop and think about your own education, your own experience of being taught growing up with sexual health education. It gives us a really good idea of how we move forward for our clients when we reflect on ourselves. And you can share in the chat if you'd like, if you feel comfortable, if anybody has any anecdotes they'd like to share. I don't have it built into the presentation here, but if you'd like to, you can go right ahead. I know it's personal, so you obviously don't have to, but we'll leave that door open if anybody would like to share.
I'll start the party here on
Go for it.
what it was like. So, first of all, my parents were wildly uncomfortable with conversation. So it never happened. And then I remember seeing my gym teacher slash basketball coach and she was pretty old at the time. Now, she was probably only 40 or 50, but at the time she seemed really old.
When
She
you're a
basically
kid.
put a condom on a banana, and everyone in the room lost their mind laughing and lost the plot of what this meant to be because we
Right.
were so like, what's happening? It was so inaccessible and so random, like you, then went on with the rest of our day, kind of
Yeah.
avoiding bananas for a while and just associating that experience with that piece of fruit and then a condom. That it
Right.
was absolutely unhelpful. So
And that reaction from your peers and from the
yeah,
way that the teacher responded, it really does set the stage for how we approach it. Even today, like we all know that our childhood experiences directly affect the way that we approach things today.
absolutely. And I think the only thing that makes you reflect or maybe seek more information if you identify as a queer person and you're actually exploring your sexuality, you
Right,
spend more time looking for information and trying to figure that piece out
right,
with
right,
resources,
right.
that then realize you're actually making yourself more vulnerable in your sexuality, and then try to seek community. So it's a complex situation for sure.
So complex. And everybody's different. That's the baseline, right? And that's what sexual health education aims to get everybody on the same playing field as best as we can. So everyone's got a general understanding, right? So Sheila says talking about sexuality is complex, generally or culturally nuanced, biased, and still to some degree taboo and not included. Of course, yeah, very taboo, I would say. Lori says, I remember thinking it was so odd that sexual education was divided by genders, even in high school. Interesting. Yeah, they didn't do that for us, but I have heard that from other Catholic schools in the area. Grew up in a very rural area. It was also always so biological. Like you said, Spencer, it was about abstinence and that sex makes babies. No topics on consent, pleasure, intimacy, etc. Yes, the special education class students were not even allowed to attend the sexual education programming at my high school. This was the same for me as well. Oh, Sheila, do you have your hand up? I
Yeah,
think
I
I can
did.
see it
I
there.
did,
Okay, go
Spencer.
for
I
it.
thought I would come off mute as well.
Yeah,
Sorry.
go for it.
I think that not to, and I think the theme is quite evident in that. I think there's still, um, I think culture really does play a very big role.
Right.
And the reason I say that is in some of the communities, still there's a lot of just personal, like, ickiness, about
Mhm.
not wanting
Yeah.
to, talk about it, or not wanting, or just such a sort of a singular lens about it,
Mhm.
that I mean, I just thought I mean, putting it out there, just coming from an, South Asian ethnic background,
Right,
I can
right.
tell you that it's just virtually non-existent. I mean, I don't know if things have changed now, but um, I think just in terms of an education, when you talk about it as education, I think there's such a difference to it because you can't have one broad-based curriculum. I think it
No.
has to be taught in the context of the environment the individual is in or the folks are in. So I just thought I'll add that in.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think it's really important to share those perspectives as well. Because, we've got folks coming from all over, and like myself with the Catholic high school education, right? It's not much. Um, Yeah, Lucas says, like Lori, my sex ed was gendered. The only recollection is being shown a video of a woman giving birth. Any other conversations or lessons were completely dwarfed by this. Yeah, we also saw the woman giving birth video, and that, like Deanna's banana example, kind of caused an uproar, and that was about it. And that's all everybody talked about was like, oh, did you see it? Yeah, swear it was meant to traumatize at the ripe age of 13. Yeah, Lori. So those, it almost feels like it's shock value. It's like we have to show it to children, so let's just do it and get it over with. But what is the actual purpose of that? Like, what is the substance behind the banana or the birth video or whatever, right? Giancarlo, do you have your hand up? Would you like to
Yeah,
speak?
I think for me, it was a lot. So not just culture, but even just like your group of friends growing
Right.
up. It was you learn more from your friend group because you would kind of learn together and explore
Yeah.
together. But it was very childish and immature. It
Right.
was
Right.
almost. It was not really an education piece. It was really more just who can grow up the fastest, who could,
Yeah.
explore other things faster than the other person.
Right.
And it was just not necessarily toxic, but more just you're almost rushing yourself to grow up.
Right.
That's how I felt. And it was like you're not doing this because of any feelings. You're not doing this to kind of um, you know, really discover or figure things out for yourself. It was more just, well, this person's doing it
Right.
and they seem
The
really
group
happy
think.
or they're
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
proud of it. Right. So, and even in school, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
They'd split us up and you, they give you the classic, here's a box. We're going to say
Mhm.
words so that people can feel comfortable around them. But it was almost like a joke. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Very childish and it was unserious for me at
Yeah.
least.
I think the only time I really, really got a good understanding of just education in terms of not just pleasure, but like safety, right?
Mhm.
Using all the different, you know, using condoms, dental dams, all those things is when you really
Right.
got into the field and you were going to start working with individuals who are looking to explore their sexual
Right.
health, their sexual bodies. And it was
Right.
like, okay, so let's give them that information. And I'm learning at the same time, right?
A
So
great way to learn is by teaching.
yeah.
So sometimes, and I think for me also talking about like growing up as a queer person, I was in those like sexual health education classes, if you can even call them that. And my naive young brain was like, well, this doesn't even apply to me. So I'm just gonna like draw a picture on the desk or do whatever, right? So there's different ways that our identities, and we'll talk about that, can influence our perspective of sexual health education. The media also played a huge part of how we viewed sex and sexuality growing up. Yeah. As a young child, sex was only for procreating and only meant between a married couple, never meant for pleasure. Wish my parents were more open. As a parent now, I agree that education in the home is important and kids should feel safe to speak about it. Yeah, I agree. And that wasn't ever something I talked about at home with my parents. And I think it was a lot around my queer identity because they didn't understand it. And they were like, we don't even know how to address this situation. So don't even ask whether it was accurate or not. Yeah.
So one of the things I think will be fun for folks after this workshop is go talk to your caregivers or your parents and ask this question now, like, why
Yeah.
didn't you, or what are your thoughts about it? I did it to my parents, and they blankly said we didn't even know how to have a conversation about it because no
Yeah.
one had a conversation with us.
Right. Right.
So we expect the school system and people around you to,
Yeah.
teach you
You
and
just
figure
figure
that
it
out,
out. Right.
right? And
And they
so,
don't even know.
no,
Like, what was their education? Like, we can't
nothing.
necessarily put the blame on like these parents or these teachers because they aren't provided with the tools either. They're just figuring it out too.
Well, and to your point, Giancarlo, we had a friend group. Our folks with IDD don't have friend groups to look at, so they go to social media and TV.
Yeah.
So depending on what age you are and what you grew up on, Degrassi Junior High was our sex ed videos.
Right.
I remember watching that, seeing Spike got pregnant. What did she do? Like, there's our example, but
Yeah.
they didn't sort of explain that process. And now we have more explicit movies and TV shows, but how do we have those conversations?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think for even now, and I'm going to put myself out there in terms of my, I guess, ignorance around some of our clients and their friend groups. Sometimes I'm afraid that they're going to get misled or get the wrong information around how to approach sex,
Right.
and how to get what feelings to expect or what their expectations are or
Yeah.
how they should go about it. Just because I just don't know. One, I don't know their friend groups completely.
Right. And who are they learning from?
And who are they getting it
Right.
from?
Their
And then,
parents, social
right.
media. Probably not their parents, to be quite honest with you, but social media. A lot of people learn from pornography. And that's obviously a bit problematic. It's kind of an idealized version of what sex looks like.
Porn is abusive and misogynist and very, very problematic to learn from, which I hear a lot of our folks talk about. That's how they think sex is going to be.
Right. Right.
Oof. And so we have to kind of break that down, and I describe it as being like going to a WWE wrestling match, like porn.
That's a great example.
It's
Yeah.
literally acted out beforehand, discussed beforehand, played out, and it's there for entertainment.
Right.
Nothing more than that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Great discussion, folks. Thank you. Closing my tab here. So just some reminders, some stuff to keep in mind. As service providers, community members, and loved ones of adults with developmental disabilities, it is vital that we do the work internally to remove our bias and stigma. Talking about how we were raised, how we've grown up with this education, we've got to do the work. So education starts with us. The more that we talk, ask questions, share resources, join Spencer Marley's presentation, and listen, the easier the discussion gets. You don't have to be comfortable or fully confident right away, but having an open mind is key. And I think this is a fairly open-minded group of folks, so I'm very lucky. If a situation arises where you don't know what the best course of action is, you can seek the guidance of your peers or direct supervision, or reach out to community organizations who might be able to help. People can tell when you feel uncomfortable. That's a big one. It can be really stigmatizing to have somebody walk on eggshells around you. I think probably lots of folks in this presentation today can relate to that feeling of someone trying to dance around a topic in a conversation or dance around your identity in a topic of conversation, like whether that's your sexual identity, race, culture, whatever. It can be really stigmatizing and folks can pick up on that. So when we assume that our clients don't have sexual or romantic desires, again, we're stripping them of the power to decide for themselves, to make those decisions. We're going to put our social worker hats back on again and talk about how we are all absolutely aware that our client population is diverse and ever expansive. We can apply this lens of intersectional identities to clients who may be facing issues around sexuality, sexual health, and identity. It allows us to see individuals as multifaceted and take other factors of their identity into account when examining how we can best support someone on their journey. So we talked a little bit like about culture, religion, race, so ability, family status, education, geographic location, age, immigration status, heritage. There's just a little diagram in the corner that I've got here that shows the different ways that a person can face oppression in their lives at the different values. So intersectionality allows us to see, like I said, that a person can face oppression at many different crossroads. As an example, a white, straight, cisgender man who is of Catholic faith might approach sexual health education from a perspective that varies in comparison to an Indigenous queer person. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to it. And it's not just sex ed. Comprehensive sexual health education does not just focus on basic biology. While learning about pregnancy, body parts, and their scientific names, the functions of sex and reproductive health are all vital to a person's education, they are not the only topics that we should be focusing on. Sexuality, gender expression, gender identities, healthy relationships, and consent all make up a more comprehensive version of sexual health education that allows individuals to make proper, informed decisions and gives them the tools they need to thrive. Despite the changes in our political landscape, LGBTQ+ individuals are finding more opportunities and words to express how they truly feel, and we are seeing this increase within the disability services sector. When we consider the increased rates for sexual abuse and assault against LGBTQ+ people, paired with a developmental disability, we can infer that the number of queer individuals with developmental disabilities who are victimized is quite substantial. To combat these numbers, practitioners in the disability services sector require education, the support of their organizations, and ultimately should be prepared to address the topics of sexuality and gender when they arise. A study conducted in 2012 through a partnership between GCSN, our Reach Out program, and their academic partners revealed that young LGBTQ+ individuals with developmental disabilities are at a higher risk of compromised sexual health. 10 individuals aged 17 to 26 provided feedback on their knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors surrounding sexual health and sexual health education. The purpose of this study was to explore the social and environmental influences on sexual vulnerability for this particular demographic. So we have some quotes here that I'd like to share because I think adding perspectives of the actual individuals is very helpful. So we'll talk about this 19-year-old participant who says that the rules were no sex and no having sex with other roommates. And if you had to, you couldn't have sex. The rules were no sex and you couldn't bring any friends over. So talking about the power that we have as service providers over our clientele, saying that there's no sex and you can't have friends over, it can really strip away that power, that decision-making, and providing a safe place to have sex. When I was in a group home, I wanted to have sex with another resident, but the group home wouldn't let us. I really wanted to get into sex because I guess I was ready at that point. I was 19, but the group home wouldn't let us. I was kind of upset and frustrated, and this comes from a 23-year-old participant. The study gives us a really great look into sexual health education and into how sexual health education and acceptance can be harm reduction. These quotes in particular. So I've gotten laid in parks, back alleys, behind stores, anywhere you can practically name it. This comes from a 19-year-old participant. Another quote is, "The first time I had sex with someone, we went to this park that was nearby, and at that time I only had a half an hour to go on free time, so I would have to be back. I hated it. It was in the winter. I was freezing cold, and I was so afraid that I was going to get in trouble." This is from a 19-year-old participant, group home resident. And if we look back at what is the harm, we can see it here. Folks are going out in public, which is obviously a danger, as you can get arrested and charged for having sex in public. It's not allowed. So putting them in danger of coming into contact with the law, physical danger, being outside in the cold, maybe not dressed properly, And they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble as well. These direct quotes can allow us to see how a lack of comprehensive sexual education and understanding can lead to these risky sexual behaviors. The more restraints that we put in place to police the sexuality of these individuals, the more risk that they will have to take in order to express themselves sexually. And they will do it. We've seen it from these quotes. These are direct participants speaking about their experiences openly and honestly, and anonymously as well. So we'll talk about our legal and ethical obligations as service providers. Sexual health is a human right is a great slogan, but sexual health education is, according to international law, a duty that we are legally and ethically required to uphold. Canada is bound by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to do the following under Article 16, freedom from exploitation, violence, and abuse. Parties shall also take all appropriate measures to prevent all forms of exploitation, violence, and abuse by ensuring, among other things, appropriate forms of gender and age-sensitive assistance and support for persons with disabilities and their families and caregivers, including the provision of information and education on how to avoid, recognize, and report instances of exploitation, violence, and abuse. Canada shall ensure that protection services, us, are age, gender, and disability sensitive. What are the experts saying? So the World Health Organization says that evidence consistently shows that a high-quality sexual education delivers positive health outcomes with lifelong impacts. Comprehensive sex ed leads to better knowledge and attitudes around sexuality, including increased knowledge of our rights within a sexual relationship, increased communication with parents about sex and relationships, greater effectiveness when managing risky situations. This is from Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights 2019. So by avoiding or delaying sexual health education for adults with developmental disabilities, we are essentially promoting abstinence-based sexual education. Evidence clearly shows that abstaining from sex is not a successful method of keeping individuals' health and well-being in check. I think we can all agree on that as well. Both LGBT people labeled with intellectual disabilities and those who work with them need educational resources that are accessible, honest, and relevant. There is a need for training curricula and resource materials to enhance the ability of frontline staff, including support workers, child and youth workers, case coordinators, service coordinators, social workers, and residential program staff to accommodate sexual health needs. And this comes from the same reach out study that was done on the 10 participants. This is one of their findings. So coming to the end of things, what is the plan? What are we going to do about it? So I've come up with this sort of model that lays out the exact or relevant plan for sexual health education as harm reduction. So it starts with education of both service providers and of service users, leads to empowerment of both types of individuals. It leads to self-determination, and then the ability to make informed decisions and recognize those unhealthy dynamics. And then hopefully that leads to the decrease of risk. When we fail to view people with developmental disabilities as capable of healthy sexuality, we fail them. And that's what I'd like you to take away from this presentation today. So that's it. That's all I've got for now. I've been Spencer Marley this whole time from GCSN Luminous Community Services. There's my number. There's my email if you want to reach out, ask any questions afterwards. If you sit with it and you've got something to say. These are some resources. We've got Community Living Ontario's The Shift, great harm reduction models for adults with developmental disabilities, for folks with developmental disabilities. They talk a little bit about sexuality as well in there, so that's really helpful. Harm Reduction International's website, City of Toronto's Supervised Consumption Services, Elevatus training programs for adults with developmental disabilities is an American-based program, but they talk a lot about sexuality, sexual health services for adults with developmental disabilities. They're really proponents of the not about us without us model. So a lot of adults with developmental disabilities are participating in the education programs. They're doing some great work. And then I added Your Sexual Health Toolkit, which is a really great visual resource, visual and written resource, just on sexual health education for yourself, for people that you know, for clients. It's great. Have a look at it if you'd like. I've got all my references here, and that's it. So we're opening the floor for any thoughts, feelings, important takeaways. Let's chat. Let's do it. Feel free to unmute or type your response in the chat.